So thank you for coming. We just wanted to start out with a sort of brief anecdote. It's when I was first at my job at Central Michigan University, and they put me on the marketing committee. And I'd never, my background is history and stuff like that. I don't know anything about marketing. And so they stuck me on the marketing committee, and they said, all right, you're in charge of collections. We've bought these things. They were really expensive archives and other sources, and nobody's using them. I want you to start marketing this stuff. Now this, at the time, I thought, well, nobody's using them. That's what we're going to market? Even then, I didn't quite understand what the problem was, but it struck me as kind of a losing proposition to start with the thing that you've done that's their biggest failure. So one of the things we want to start with is to ask Jill to talk about what does she think about this strategy.
Hello everyone, thanks so much for being here. Your tenacity in facing the shortage of seating, the weather, the post-lunch sort of sleepiness is the kind of tenacity that will serve you very well as you go to market your library, so I appreciate that. And a little bit of quick background about who I am and why I took on writing this. I started out my career in libraries as the undergraduate services librarian at Virginia Commonwealth University. Did a lot of outreach, instruction, reference work. So I realized in the process of doing all that is what I'm really doing is marketing to people, essentially. But I didn't, kind of to Matthew's point, I didn't know anything about marketing. So while I was at VCU, I got a certificate in marketing. One thing led to another. I ended up in the private sector doing market research and competitive intelligence for marketing firms who work with banks. Did a little bit of direct marketing, and then found my way back to libraries at University of Virginia as the user experience librarian, which was a perfect fit because by that time I had done all the market research, I knew libraries, it just seemed to make sense. And now I'm managing the team who not only does the research for our user research, but also does the website, so designers and developers who work on that. So it's kind of come full circle, and I've been thinking about this a long time. So in a lot of ways, it was very cathartic to write it. But I hope that this conversation extends far beyond this book and that you all get out of it what it is that you want. So I encourage you to ask questions, and if you think of them today, that's great. If you think of them months from now, that's also great, because I really want to help everybody in their marketing challenges.
So one of the things that's most important when we think about marketing is marketing just about telling people what you have, or is marketing understanding what the context for your work is first? And I think this is one of the primary issues we have to deal with when we're talking about marketing in libraries. But really, defining marketing as promotion is probably not just because people aren't aware of what marketing really is. It's probably something to do with the primary focus of this book. Why do people in libraries often resist engaging in marketing, even if they know what it is? And I think this is one of the things that Jill addresses very nicely in this book. It's not just about not knowing, it's about not wanting to do it. And I think this is something important.
Well, if I were to characterize one of the reasons I wrote this book, it would be out of a sort of a source of optimistic frustration. I have had some just honest frustration working with colleagues who do awesome work. I think everybody in this room, the fact that you're at this conference, you're at this session, you care about what you do, you care about actually connecting that up with users, and I hear over and over again from users, from librarians, users don't seem to know that we have this resource or this service. Users who say, I wish I had known, years ago that you could do this. And so, that in itself is frustrating. In addition to the fact that I think a complicating factor, at least this is what I propose, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but in having talked about marketing and written about marketing for a while, I have stumbled upon some pockets of resistance in libraries, if not because people necessarily think we shouldn't be doing that, but it's not a logical cultural fit. It feels kind of yucky to have to explain to people, libraries are valuable, what I do is valuable, and here's how. I mean, shouldn't that be intuitive? And it should be. But the reality is that it takes quite a bit of sort of focused discipline to make that reality actually apparent to people. So that was sort of another point of frustration where we might give, we as a profession, and I know there's exceptions and individuals who are doing great marketing work, but it just feels a little bit force-fit. And when I know at my institution, the university is looking at the ways in which we evaluate the utility of our services, is something worthwhile to do or not, and they're really looking for us to prove results, and it has this sort of corporate sort of feel to it in terms of we have to prove ROI and these sorts of things that just aren't really a part of our ethos naturally. But what I have always believed about marketing is that it is a toolkit that we should wield to do what it is that's uniquely great for libraries. And I think, and I can talk about some of this as I do in here, that there's a strain of thinking in marketing that is very well aligned with what librarians sort of naturally want to do. Just because we might be using principles from business, it doesn't mean that we have to shoehorn our values into that framework, but we should use it as a way to sort of liberate what it is that we care about and kind of play by their rules, but really achieve our ends. So those were sort of the points of frustration. I thought, I could really hopefully help people kind of make a difference. And going back to Matthew's point about what real marketing is sort of my final quibble with commonly accepted practice in libraries is that we always want to figure out how to talk to people better, more, at the right time. It's a lot about talking at people. And we all know as consumers of other products, we don't love being talked to so much. So the real work of marketing that I propose is really at the service level. It's when you're thinking about what you're buying, when you're thinking about how you construct your services, that you're really focusing on how you're delivering value for the specific people you want to target. And we can talk more about targeting as well. And not so much talking, that's important, and there are lots of strategies for how you can do that, better ways than others. But the real work comes much earlier on in the process, not when you're kind of saddled with a thing you have to kind of push out there to people. So those were the things that I'm trying to counter.
And I think what we really want to emphasize is that a marketing campaign does not start with 10 librarians sitting around a table deciding what they're going to do and then saying, okay, now we've decided, now let's tell everyone. Okay? This is what is very common. Marketing means you go and decide what's important to you and what makes sense for you, and then you push it out to everyone. This is pretty much backwards. And I think that's one of the important things that Jill can elucidate more.
Yeah, so to sort of build on that, it might be helpful to give an example, one that is sort of a common one that I encounter. So when I'm in marketing sessions and being sort of responsible for the website, I get a fair number of, we need to put this on the site kinds of things. And one of the things that we always get asked to do, I think, is promote the Ask a Librarian service. So our chat, emails, virtual reference points of service. And I think for librarians, it's very satisfying to have people come to us and be those intermediaries and that kind of thing. And users do derive a lot of value from that service, but I feel like I would really like us as a profession to probe more when we get requests like that. So who are we actually, when we're talking about ESSA, what's the value to users? What are we trying to achieve? Do we want more stats? Is more better? Are more questions actually an indicator that you're successful in creating value for users? It could be that you get a whole lot more where's the bathroom questions, and that's not maybe a success in my mind, but if you sort of pair traffic with the content of the questions, are we getting more substantive research questions, and is that a measure of success? And then that then leads you to think, okay, well maybe there are certain folks I would be gearing that service toward at different times of the year, and on and on. So the whole kind of thought process changes a little bit when you start really probing, why are we doing this? What's the benefit to users? And that kind of thing. So one of the conclusions I sort of draw in the book that felt a tad unsatisfying, but I think it's really not doing a service to you all to say, yeah, just follow this checklist of marketing things you can do. Here's what your social media policy should look like. Here's what your posters and web strategy should be like. But it's really about those conversations. I think that is hard, and it isn't maybe instantly gratifying. But if I'm being honest with you, that's where I feel like the gap in the marketing literature for libraries is, and sort of when I'm in conversations where I feel like we just don't take those questions to a level where we're really pairing up user needs with our mission and just being rigorous about that with what we want to achieve. So I'm curious to know, I kind of like to take a little pause and see if this is resonating with anybody who might also have questions about maybe things that are conceptions that you've had about marketing that you would like to explore a little bit further. Yes.
So I'm just going to stand up and talk really loudly so that everyone can hear me. So I'm just like kind of being taken aback here, because what I'm hearing that marketing is also strategic planning, which is also user needs assessment. And I'm the kind of librarian who likes to have my terms nice and separate. So I would like to have a strategic planning process in which marketing is taken into consideration, and I would like that strategic planning process to be based on user needs assessment, but I wouldn't call either of those activities marketing itself. So can you, maybe I'm just not getting this whole concept of I think, yes, remembering the importance of user needs assessment and the importance of strategic planning helps make marketing not seem like a creepy corporate scheme, but it still isn't marketing. If I'm the head of marketing for my library, I don't want to be having to do all that stuff as part of my job. I'd rather our library director be in charge of strategic planning and that kind of stuff. So I don't know, just clarification about the terms you're using and how they're separate from one another and how responsibilities are separate from one another, because I don't want to do all this.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and I would like to summarize it since you didn't have the mic, but I think in short what you're saying is that the definition of marketing seems a lot broader than what you had expected to hear, and that it sounds a lot like strategic planning and a lot of these other activities. And so, can we clarify what we mean by what we say in marketing? And I would say that when you study marketing, and marketing's itself has gone through a few iterations, which I touch on in the book. But has anyone heard of the 4 Ps of marketing? Okay, Karen has, and she's a business librarian, so that's good. But so the 4 Ps are product, price, place, and promotion. And to kind of translate that into library lingo, the product is the service or the thing that you design and develop. The price is the cost, and in terms of libraries, I would like to do a lot more research on what that means, but I've interpreted it as how much time does it take for someone to actually achieve benefit from your service, what kinds of other risks to maybe is it intimidating, and is that sort of an emotional risk that I'm going to take by using your service. Place is how you get things out to people, so if you deliver something through the web, in person, those kinds of considerations. And then it's the promotion piece, which is what I think definitely is the most well-recognized aspect of marketing. Usually, and when I've talked to marketing folks, they would say, ideally you're doing the marketing piece last, because one of the things I point out in the book, so I'm wandering a little bit, I'll get back to my original point. So Ithaca had a survey about library directors and their perception of what was most important for them to do, and I think in their minds, serving undergraduate constituents was the most important thing. But they didn't believe that their administrators felt the same way. So when I read something like that from a marketing perspective, you can communicate to those administrators till you're sort of blue in the face about undergraduate, support services and so forth. But you're going to be talking past each other if that real work of marketing, which is, in my mind, the service development, and I think it does tie into strategic planning. I think that is sort of the crux of marketing, making sure that the value that you say that somebody is going to get is actually seen all the way through to getting that service. So if those things are at a disconnect, and you've walked into places, I'm sure, where they promise something and you get something quite different, you're setting yourselves up for failure. So I think it's true that the way that I would advocate thinking about marketing is a lot more holistic than we are accustomed to thinking about it. But the benefit in doing that is that it takes a lot of the, people can see through something that's not authentic in your communication. So if what you're communicating and the people who are designing the service aren't connected in any way, then your communication isn't really set up to be as effective as you could do. Then you have to think about, are we really investing our energies in the right place? I don't know if that helps or it just makes the job seem that much bigger, but I think that is a paradigm shift that I think we need to make to be more effective.
I think it is quite desirable to keep in mind that marketing is often viewed as a sort of, well, we're already doing all this work, let's have a marketer help us get the word out. And when you do it that way, you're divorcing your communication with your community from planning beforehand that involves their needs. Okay?
I mean,
So
I really want to stand up against that. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but like, I would hope that even if you weren't marketing any of your stuff, that before you designed your services, you did a user needs assessment. That you said, we want to make sure that before we even planned our services, we're like, what do our people need? Let's create services like that. And if you've done that in the initial planning project, and then you decide to tack on marketing on top of that because you were so busy doing your user needs assessment, like, it doesn't suddenly mean that you're marketing something that's completely inauthentic and doesn't meet their needs. It just means your user needs assessment was a different part of the process than your marketing was, and that's okay. I don't know, just
Yeah, I think it would be, and so if you have done all of your sort of market research and you've designed something that has value and you're on the communication path, that's perfectly legitimate and good. And what I think I would argue is that, so when we say marketing, in that context, I think it's more accurate to say you're talking about promotion, which is an aspect of this whole ecosystem of marketing activity that our libraries are engaged in. I don't know that all libraries have done their user needs assessments, maybe not, to varying degrees, I don't know. I also think in that regard there are some marketing strategies that might enter into consideration that maybe aren't typically done in libraries. So segmentation, so what users you study and how you frame what that population is. So in higher education, we talk a lot about undergraduates, graduate students, faculty. We sort of have those segments in mind. So when we do our user needs assessments, we're often asking faculty, and maybe we subdivide by discipline, students depending on rank and that sort of thing. But could you think about a segment that might span those other segments and lead you to develop services and think about user needs in a different way? So even slight sort of spins on your segmentation strategy, like thinking about undergraduates who have library assignments as opposed to undergraduates who don't have library assignments. I bet that might spawn some service ideas that might lead you to different value propositions that you can then promote. But again, I think taking the marketing view might even inform that user needs assessment in a different way. So I don't know if I'm helping to answer your question or not. I think it sounds like you're doing a good job if you're designing services that have value and your communication is an extension of that, then that's good. I would argue that's maybe not as common in my sort of observation and experience. Are there other questions? So Matthew's reminded me, since I had talked about segmentation, another sort of conception that I think is fairly popular, and it's counterintuitive again to this librarian ethos about if you do segment your users into these discrete populations, are you therefore refusing service or somehow not fulfilling your mission of serving sort of the greater good and the greater population? And certainly in our university, we serve the general public, we serve affiliates of the university, we serve researchers from other institutions and so forth. So, but what I think the advantage of segmentation is that, again, if you can get creative with it, you might discover underlying needs that cut across maybe traditional ways of thinking about service problems, and then you can actually potentially reach more people than you could have otherwise if you were thinking in kind of traditional silos. And by serving some groups very well, as we know, faculty listen to other faculty when they are, looking for guidance on, what they should do. And if you do really well by a group of people, that word will get out, and then you're therefore sort of extending the base of users who will benefit. So it's a little counterintuitive to think I'm being selective in who I'm choosing to serve, but these are the people at this moment in time I feel I can do the best job by, and therefore hopefully extend that sort of goodwill and ability to do good work to similar groups, or maybe groups I hadn't even thought about serving because I didn't look at the population in quite that way. Yes.
Could you give a kind of a case study of maybe a segment or a group you identified and their need, and kind of how you worked through to promotion? I just love to kind of hear the whole process for like a specific example.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of an example because I can think of more examples maybe from outside of libraries, and I'm trying to think of if I've referenced any in here. I think about different segments of users. In one case recently within my library, we in the user experience side of things have looked at users with certain sort of accessibility issues. And we have, as a result, partnered with our coordinator for academic accessibility to make certain types of information about how to caption videos, as one example, sort of serving as an information portal for the university for sort of an area of need that's underserved to date. So I would say that, I can't remember how that sort of evolved. It seemed like it was a very natural evolution of thinking about usability and sort of what that means. And there was a gap really in the market. But what I would say, it has made me think a little bit differently about other accessibility issues that we could be tackling. So there are the physical accessibility issues. To some extent, we're a little bit limited by the buildings that we have. But it did prompt us to conduct a focus group with students who identified as having an accessibility issue. And I recall one person who sort of was very hard of hearing reported to me that she was intimidated to use the library because when some of the staff, and this isn't true of everyone, this was just one incident that she had that made an impression, the student or whomever was working the desk couldn't recognize that the person couldn't hear and sort of alter their communication strategy as a result. So maybe instead of talking louder or repeating, could you write something down? And so she felt people weren't really responding to her need. And so we talked through what we could do training-wise and so forth. So it was an example of, we made a service improvement for a portion of the population that we, previously we didn't know this need. And so it has caused me to sort of think about, again, if we're promoting ourselves as a welcoming place for everybody, how are we carrying that through sort of into our services? I have since invited, speakers to come in and talk to librarians about hidden disabilities, for example. And so we've really gotten into this realm of accessibility work that transcends just, tackling one thing like the service examples, but now we're looking at, we have content on our website to support that. We're training librarians how to write live guides that are accessible and create web content that's accessible. So I think that's one example because it's a way that has profoundly impacted our services. And when we go to communicate to users that, we welcome, everyone to our spaces, hopefully that feeling is conveyed in fact. They'll find things that are relevant, people who are prepared, and that kind of thing. Does that help?
I think so. Yeah, thank you.
How do you actually advertise that you have those live guides and all those things that are written up for a specific population? Because that sounds like the marketing end of things.
Yeah, so that does get into the marketing end of things somewhat. Some of it is due to the relationships that we formed with our coordinator for academic accessibility, and that has been the result of conversations and sort of relationship building. On the website of things, I have had you mentioned live guides, and so I'm going to bring it back from accessibility a little bit and talk about, I've had a recent meetings with our collections folks who are, they kind of express this, again, frustration. People don't know what we have. So we're looking at ways to chunk up the information on our website so that we can present it more like you don't have to go to a page about our live guides, but if you are, say, a faculty member who needs to caption their videos in some way, are we curating that information at their point of need and putting a pointer to a relevant live guide when you're looking at our captioning resources or something like that there. So it's really thinking about curating our web information a little bit more rather than, in this particular case, than sort of having banners and this sort of a lot of waste coverage when we are communicating with people too broadly, and really thinking about their point of need and when do they need this information. Does that help?
Well, how do students who need some of the different techniques for obtaining information, how do they find out what you offer?
So we work with our instruction.
Accessibility policy, do you have it? Do you have these items posted somewhere so the student doesn't have to be embarrassed at a desk?
Mm-hmm.
They can find out and get some information before interacting with someone in the event they don't understand.
No, that's helpful, thank you. So yes, we have really invested in our web presence in terms of information about services for persons with accessibility issues. So that was one way in which we have reached out to people. We again have done the service training, which is another, I think, important addition, because as our instructors are engaging with people, for example, one-on-one, they're now, they might not know a person has an accessibility issue, and you might not need to disclose that, but the instruction itself is presented in a way that learners who prefer different styles can achieve. So I don't know that it's as direct as, hey, if you have a problem, here's how we're fixing it, but it's more a cultural change about recognizing that we have this population within our midst, and we need to be thinking about that as we create the thing. So that kind of goes back to making the service out of the box accessible.
I'm just wondering if you have like an old-fashioned advertising budget so that the library can actually place an ad in the student paper or other marketing tools that the whole university is using.
Yeah, we don't have a marketing arm formally in our library. That's not to say that we don't, do some of the more traditional communication work of posting banners to our website, or we do have a person who will feed stories to, the papers as we need, sort of more ad hoc. So we don't have it completely formalized in that sense. And one of the things that I am hoping to sort of convey to people is that regardless of your role or whether or not you have a marketing department, you're touching marketing in some way. If you're touching a service and making it work for your users, you have a stake in marketing. So again, if we have this frame that it's all about just telling people, my question is, what are we telling them? When are we telling them? What's going to get their attention and sort of seeing that from the crowd? And I think that's derived from thinking through what our service offering and value proposition is. So just to kind of bring it back, the techniques and the tactics for getting the word out, I think, are less challenging than making our services really resonate with people.
What are some of the ways that you measure the success of a marketing effort?
Mm-hmm. And so if we're talking marketing promotion, those might be separate issues. So I use the example sort of ask a librarian, and I think perhaps that's an apt one. I can't hone in, and metrics are extremely important. In my experience in marketing, it has become more science than art. I mean, in direct marketing, it's they have A/B tests for the subject lines that you use, and it's all very scientific. And I don't know that we have the resources quite to do things at that level. But I feel like it's a triangulation of data derive from a number of places. So if you're talking about, say, Ask a Librarian, again, I ask, is the number of transactions the salient indicator for success? Talking about that when somebody requests to promote Ask a Librarian would be a good thing. Or are we really trying to get at something more? Are there certain users who are underutilizing that service that we would really like to reach? Can we determine whether or not they've actually increased their usage, either through metrics collected through click-throughs or through surveys or other means? And are we also looking at some less quantitative measures in sort of overall satisfaction with the library, satisfaction with the services that we offer? So I feel like it's not one metric. I feel like it's important to have ways in which to collect these metrics continuously, and I know we're working on putting just print comment cards at strategic locations in our library because we don't have that yet, and then marrying that up with something similar online so that people never have to doubt where it is they can give feedback. And I think, and we do an annual user survey, and so we sort of triangulate that, and I think it's important to consider if we are achieving the value proposition the service was intended to achieve, what would be the logical metrics? And it may or may not just be use. It might be something a little more deep than that.
Do you also, sorry. Hello everyone, I'm from California State University, Long Beach. Do you collaborate with other units on campus? Because my campus, we have more than nearly half our students are transfer students, and so that's been an interest of mine over the years, how having the library help transfer students successfully transition into this new environment, and not just assume, and definitely in case of library instruction, they've had it because they've been undergraduate somewhere else. I said, well, they haven't had exposure to our stuff and how we do it here, and so now, and then also the fact that they are now upper division court, students, and that's a different ballgame than being an undergrad taking, under a lower division student taking GE courses. And so over the years, I've seen a disconnect among people who are about to graduate from our university and they were transfer students and they never felt connected to the library. Or like, I didn't know you guys had this.
Yeah.
If I had known this 18 months ago when I transferred, I was like...
Yes, that's the frustration, had I known. So, do we work with other units on campus? Yes. I'm not directly involved in outreach, but we have, folks who do that. And I think with the website, I don't want to get into a technical conversation, but we're trying to structure our website and API in ways that the university can leverage and students can leverage our data, and I think that's one maybe form of outreach that we're working on. But I would maybe point to an analogous thing that we're sort of addressing, which is we don't have outreach to new faculty. It's different than the transfer student situation in some ways, but in others there's a point of people who are becoming acquainted with what it is that we do, and I think we're missing some opportunities there. So we've just sort of kicked out this effort where I got a group of liaisons together who work with their departments and really wanted to do a user journey of what a new faculty might experience throughout their career. I found that going through that exercise as a timeline wasn't super effective, but I think what I learned from that is this period of 3 to 5 years in when faculty are sort of trying to get tenure, and we talked a lot about the pressures that faculty are under, the sort of their emotional states throughout their careers. And so identified that first 3 to 5 years as a key point of engagement, that we need to really tailor our communications and our services to figure out how we can reduce that stress level, introduce them to instructional resources for those who are teaching, and research resources for those who are going for tenure, and maybe segmenting them that way. So I would just say, in terms of transfer students, what are the barriers? What's the user journey like? What are the touch points when they're starting to get acquainted with your library or your university? And then that would inform where the logical connection points would be. And I've done that when I did undergraduate outreach. I think I talked to every single service that touched an undergraduate that there was on campus. But knowing about that context, I think, would help you generate marketing ideas. Yes.
Hi. Thanks. I'm gonna try to keep this not too wonky, but so I'm a marketer for like a pretty large publisher, and so in terms of segmenting, it's really interesting to me because I'm kind of dealing with this clash of ideas basically, and so we tend to do really targeted segmenting with an advanced Salesforce tool, and it allows us to hit really small parts of the population that have a niche interest in something we might be pushing. And I find that to be sometimes successful, but sometimes I find just having a huge net and throwing it in the ocean to be way more successful. So, and then that gets into kind of the spammy neighborhood. But one I'm seeing a lot of success with in terms of like free trials taken out by librarians and interest and engagement engagement including open rates, click-through rates, that kind of thing. But in the other, I really don't get anything back from it, even though it's targeted. So like I'm dealing with that kind of clash, and I think a lot of it has to do with data integrity. But if you're just a marketer and you're not like someone who has access to clean up data or like doing huge data work, how do you deal with that that kind of clash?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll try to repeat it succinctly, but question, he's observing as a publisher that he's actually getting better results casting a wide net versus doing very precise segmentation. I don't know that in libraries, and I might be missing something, but the ability to dig that deeply into the data, we don't always have that data, to your point. But I think one of the things that you said made me think that there's another distinction that maybe librarians should consider, which is sort of there's in marketing we call it, there's your drip marketing, where you have sort of these constant sort of messages that you sort of pepper your audience with. And that might be in the case of libraries, what are our core value propositions for everybody that we really, and this goes back, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about mission, because I think everything does come back to what our unique value is to our users and reminding people of that, versus sort of a campaign, which is what you're working on, these sort of tactical promotional things. And again, it might have to do with data integrity, why things aren't working in your case, rather than the segmentation concept being flawed. But if we just focus on sort of those very tactical one-off promotions where we want to promote this resource or we want to promote this service, we want to do this, then we're missing sort of that overarching kind of value proposition that the library has. So the reason that your question made me think of that was that it might be that some of your messaging really is more universal than you recognize, and maybe the opportunities to target are not the ones that you're focusing in on. So I don't know if that helps. I would say that segmentation overall is usually good, but you shouldn't do it just to segment people. If it's not working, it's not working. There are different ways to communicate with an audience, sort of an ongoing message that you're trying to get out, and then focusing on discrete campaigns and things that you want to promote.